The first sign of trouble came with the laughter. It drifted over the East Gotham suburbs just past midnight, faint, hollow, a scratchy wheeze like an old radio stuck between stations. No one paid it much attention at first. Gotham was no stranger to strange sounds. But by morning, 3 people were missing, and a carnival had appeared. No one knew who built it. No permits had been filed, no trucks had been seen, no workers spotted. But there it was, as if it had clawed its way up from the earth overnight. An entire carnival squatting at the edge of the city in a fog-covered lot that had been empty for years. The entrance arch was rusted, the paint flaking off like dead skin, but the sign above still flickered. "Ha ha, land, laughs for all." Detective Elisa Graves stared at the carnival from behind the yellow police tape, jaw tight. She'd been with the GCPD for 8 years, and not once had she seen something wrong. A chill air seemed to radiate from the lot, and she noticed her breath clouding despite the early summer heat. The carnival sat quiet now, no music, no movement, but somehow it felt alive. "Graves," a voice called from behind her. She turned to see her partner, Detective Marco Jett, approaching with a folder in hand. "3 disappearances last night," he said grimly. "All last seen near this area. Witnesses say they heard laughing. One said it sounded like it was coming from inside their walls." Graves took the file and flipped it open. Photos of the missing. College student, a maintenance worker, and a 10-year-old boy. All vanished within the same 2-hour window. "No security footage?" she asked. Jett shook his head. "Cameras glitched. Whole neighborhood was hit with static." Graves squinted through the haze toward the carousel. The horses were chipped and peeling, their eyes gouged out. She could have sworn one of them was turned slightly, watching her. "There's no way this thing went up overnight," she muttered. "This takes days, weeks." "No one saw a thing," Jett said. "And get this, the lot is registered to a man named Jack Napier." Graves froze. "Joker," she whispered. They both fell silent. No one had seen the Joker in over a year. Rumors ranged from Arkham's deepest cells to him being dead, finally burned out like a diseased candle. But Gotham wasn't that lucky. They stood there. A soft melody drifted on the wind. A slow, cracked version of Pop Goes the Weasel coming from deep within the carnival. The carousel lights flickered once, then came alive. Dim yellows and reds spinning like bleeding suns. Without a word, Graves stepped under the tape. "Graves," Jett called, but she held up a hand. "I'll just look around, stay close." The air inside was colder. Wrong. The smell of rotted candy and mildew curled in her nose. Her boots crunched over broken glass and something else. Ribbons? No, strips of cloth and hair. The game still stood. A ring toss with severed mannequin fingers. A dunk tank with water as black as ink. A clown's head sat on a pole next. To the shooting gallery, eyes wide, painted smile forever fixed. She paused near the funhouse. The mirrors inside were warped, filthy. One was cracked in the center, split clean down the middle like a grin. She leaned in, curious despite herself. And there it was, a flash of white face paint, a smear of red lips. She spun around. Nothing. But the laughter came again. Closer now. It echoed from inside the tent behind the funhouse, a large striped thing that hadn't been there before. Her radio crackled with static. She raised it to her lips. "Jett, do you see this tent? It wasn't on the map." No response, only laughter threaded with whispers. "Elisa," her name. She drew her sidearm and stepped inside the tent. It was pitch black for a moment. Then light snapped on. The tent was impossibly large inside, stretching far beyond its exterior. A stage stood at the center, drenched in red velvet curtains. Rows of empty seats lined the room, all facing the stage. She moved cautiously down the aisle. Each step echoed unnaturally loud. A spotlight snapped on, blinding her. A voice boomed over unseen speakers, playful and cracked. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Gotham's favorite little circus of sin." Graves raised her gun. Tonight's feature performer, fresh from her little crime-solving career. Detective Elisa Graves. Give her a big hand. Applause erupted from the empty chairs. She turned in a circle. No one was there. Another spotlight revealed the stage. A figure stepped through the curtain. Tall, gaunt, smiling. The Joker. But he was wrong. His face was stretched, as if sewn tighter at the edges. His eyes were sunken, glowing faintly. And his smile never moved. A wide, jagged red scar had replaced his lips, cut ear to ear. He didn't laugh. He didn't speak. He just watched her. Graves opened fire. 3 shots cracked out, echoing into silence. When the smoke cleared, the stage was empty. The Joker was gone. So was the tent. She stood alone in the lot, gun smoking. The rusted rides quiet. Once more, her radio clicked back on. "Graves, Elisa, where the hell did you go?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at her hand. In her palm was a small white card she hadn't seen before. A Joker playing card. On the back, written in blood-red ink, "You laughed. I heard it. Let's play again tomorrow. J. Elisa." Graves couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her home. The card, the Joker's card, still sat on the table beside her, the blood-red writing smudged slightly by her trembling fingers. "You laughed. I heard it. Let's play. Again tomorrow. J." The words danced in her mind, echoing through her thoughts like a terrible, contagious rhythm. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his smile. That smile. The grin that never left. No matter how much she tried to push it away, it lingered. Carved into her memory. She thought she could handle this. She thought she was prepared for anything Gotham threw at her. But this felt different. A sharp knock at the door snapped her out of her thoughts. "Detective Graves?" The voice on the other side was strained, almost whispering. "It's Officer Dale. We need you downtown. Something's happened." Elisa didn't reply. At first, her mind raced. Was it more disappearances, another victim, or was this something else, something worse? She grabbed her coat and stepped into the hallway. The apartment felt oppressive. The walls too close, the air too thick. It was as if Joker's influence had seeped into every crevice. She could almost feel his eyes on her, always watching, always waiting. "Detective?" Officer Dale's voice cut through her thoughts. "Are you coming?" Elisa opened the door, steeling herself. "I'm on my way." The scene at the crime scene was unnerving, even by Gotham standards. A group of officers huddled near the entrance of an abandoned building. On a quiet street. An old, decrepit townhouse that had been vacant for years. It wasn't the location that unsettled Elisa. It was the thing that had been found. A body, though calling it a body felt wrong. The figure sprawled on the cracked pavement looked like a man, but only in shape. His features were unrecognizable, distorted into an unnatural, grotesque mask. His face was painted white, smeared with red in a horrifying imitation of a smile. A smile that stretched unnaturally wide, too wide. A grotesque parody of joy. His lips were torn at the edges, not by knife or blade, but by something far more twisted. The officers turned their heads, unable to look directly at the sight. But Elisa's eyes didn't leave the corpse. She could almost feel the darkness, crawling in through the cracks, the weight of it pressing against her chest. It was as if the very air had become heavier, filled with the stench of something ancient and malevolent. "Who found him?" she asked, her voice strained but steady. That would be Officer Dale, ma'am," another officer replied, pointing to the young cop who had accompanied her earlier. Dale stepped forward, his face pale. I don't know how to explain it, Detective. We were called in after the call about the missing person, but when we arrived, this thing was just standing there, grinning at us." Elisa knelt down, her heart pounding. She had seen Joker's handiwork before, his gruesome, twisted signature. But this was something new. A part of her wanted to look away, but she couldn't. She needed to know. She needed to understand. "What exactly did it do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It just stared at us. At first I thought it was a joke, a prank, but then, I swear to God, Detective, it laughed. And I swear it wasn't any normal laugh. It was like it came from everywhere, like it was inside your skull. I tried to get closer, but the second I did, it just fell over, like a puppet with its strings cut. Did anyone touch it?" Lisa asked quickly. "No," Dale said, shaking his head. "We stayed back, didn't even get close until the coroner arrived. But there's something else. The body, it's still warm." Elisa's blood went cold. "Warm? How long has it been dead?" "We don't know. It just showed up, and then there was the laughter." Elisa looked back at the man's painted face. It was so wrong. Too wrong. It was like looking at a twisted reflection of someone you knew, but who had been broken and remade into something far worse. Her stomach churned as she stood up, her mind racing. She couldn't explain it, but something about this man, the way he was positioned, the unnatural grin frozen in place, reminded her of something familiar. "Detective Graves, there's more," another officer spoke up. "We found this." He handed her a small yellowed scrap of paper. Elisa took it and unfolded it carefully. The paper was old, frayed at the edges, and it looked like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. The writing was jagged, uneven, as if it had been scrawled in a hurry. "The painted stranger waits, but not for long. If you see him, you're already lost." She froze. Who wrote this?" she asked, her voice tight. "We don't know," Officer Dale replied. "It was found with the body." "Where exactly was it?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Underneath his hand," Dale said. "Just like it was meant to be found." Elisa felt a creeping dread crawl down her spine. She had heard whispers, vague rumors about a figure, the painted stranger, a shadow that stalked Gotham's forgotten corners. But it had always been just a legend. A story told in dark alleys and hushed voices, told to children to frighten them into behaving. But now, the legend had come to life. "Take the body to the morgue," Elisa said, her voice shaking with an emotion she couldn't name. "I need everything on him, every scrap of evidence, and find out who he was. I'll be at the precinct." She walked away, her mind racing. The painted stranger. The man who appeared in mirrors, whose smile haunted the minds of those who saw him. But there was something more to this. Something darker than even Joker's games. And it was just beginning. Elisa Graves couldn't escape the laughter. It was everywhere. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible. Just a slight echo in the background, like a far-off radio station playing in the distance. But over the past few days it had grown louder. Louder. Closer. The laughter didn't make sense. It wasn't normal laughter. Not like something you might hear at a comedy club or at a child's birthday party. No. It was deep, warped, full of malice. It crawled into your ears and lodged itself in your brain until you couldn't think of anything else, until you couldn't escape it. It was as if it were alive, hunting you. At first, Elisa had chalked it up to stress. She had just investigated a murder with the grotesque fingerprints of the Joker all over it. She had the card, the taunting message. It was only natural that her mind would be on edge. But the laughter was different. It wasn't just in her head. It was real. She sat in her dimly lit apartment, trying to focus on the case files spread out in front of her. The missing persons cases, the evidence from the carnival. But every time she tried to read, every time she tried to concentrate, the laughter broke through. It came again, soft at first, a high-pitched giggle. Then a full-blown cackling, like a chorus of voices, too many voices, overlapping and twisting. Together, she froze, the files slipping from her hands and falling to the floor with a dull thud. It was coming from inside the walls. Her heart hammered in her chest. The sound was unmistakable now, so clear, so sharp. It was laughing at her, mocking her. The sound was relentless, like a ticking clock, counting down to something terrible, something she couldn't outrun. Elisa stood up and walked cautiously toward the living room wall. The laughter was louder now, closer, filling the space around her. She pressed her ear to the cracked plaster. The sound reverberated beneath her skin. A strange sensation crawled up her spine. Her pulse quickened. She didn't want to do it, but she couldn't stop herself. She grabbed the small metal crowbar she kept in the corner and pried at the loose wall paneling. Her hands trembling as the laughter grew louder, more insistent. The wall gave way easily, as if it had been waiting for her. She ripped the panel off, and the laughter burst out, filling the room like a swarm of bees. There was nothing behind the wall, just empty space. Nothing except dust and decay. Elisa's breathing was shallow, her mind scrambling to make sense of what she was hearing. The wall was empty, but the laughter was still there. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. A flash of movement caught her eye. She whipped around, her gun in hand, ready to fire. But there was nothing, only the darkness. Her chest tightened as she lowered the gun. She turned back to the wall, her breath coming faster now. The laughter was still there, echoing from within the very bones of her apartment. She knew what she had to do. The next day, Elisa arrived at the precinct, exhausted and on edge. The laughter had kept her up all night. Every time she closed her eyes, it was there, just beneath the surface, ready to drown her in madness. She couldn't escape it. Felt like it was creeping inside her mind, eroding her thoughts, pulling her closer to the edge of sanity. She stepped into her office and slammed the door behind her, hoping for a moment of peace. She needed answers. She needed something to stop the laughter. But the moment she sat down, her phone buzzed. A text, no name, just a string of words. The painted stranger is closer than you think. He's inside your mind now. He waits for you to laugh. Elisa stared at the message, her heart skipping a beat. She should have known, she should have expected this. The Joker's influence had never been bound by physical limitations. It had always been a mind game, a sick game. But this was different. The Joker was toying with her in ways she couldn't even comprehend. Her hands shook as she typed a response, her fingers fumbling over the keys. Who is this? The phone buzzed again, and this time a photo appeared. A blurry image of a man with a painted face, a distorted grin stretching across his cheeks, eyes gleaming with malevolent delight. The figure was standing in a mirror, his face just barely visible, a ghostly silhouette. Elisa's stomach twisted. She had seen this before. The painted stranger. The figure whispered about in dark corners of Gotham. The figure who didn't just haunt your dreams. He was something worse, something more insidious. She stared at the photo until the image blurred before her eyes, and then the laughter came again. But this time, it wasn't just in her head. It was in her apartment, echoing from the walls. The voice was louder now, closer. Elisa's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She had to leave, she realized. There was no choice. The walls were closing in. The laughter was taking control. She stood up and grabbed her coat, but before she could step out the door, she froze. In the reflection of her hallway mirror, she saw it, the painted stranger. His grin stretched impossibly wide, his eyes gleaming through the dark. She spun around, but there was nothing. No one. Just the empty hallway. The laughter intensified, a chorus of distorted voices, reverberating off the walls, through the floors and into her bones. Elisa staggered back, her mind shattering. She didn't know where to go, where to hide. It was everywhere now. The Joker had won. The painted stranger had invaded her mind. She dropped to her knees, clutching her head. The laughter was deafening, suffocating. She couldn't think, she couldn't breathe. It was as if her very thoughts were being twisted, distorted by the sound. And then, through the chaos, a voice broke through. "You're next, detective." It was him, Joker's voice. And it was the last thing Elisa heard before the world went dark. Elisa woke with a start, gasping for air as though she had just emerged from deep water. Her head throbbed, a sharp, relentless pain behind her eyes. She blinked, her vision blurred, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. The laughter? Had it been real? Was it still there? She sat up quickly, her hands trembling as she reached for the lamp beside her bed. The room was still. Too still. No laughter. No voices. But the silence felt suffocating, like something was waiting in the shadows. Was it a dream? She didn't know. She didn't care. She had to keep moving. She had to finish this. Elisa dragged herself out of bed and made her way to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was cracked, a jagged line running down its center. She stared at her reflection, her face pale, eyes bloodshot. But that wasn't what made her stop. What made her freeze was the faint, twisted outline in the mirror's reflection. A dark figure standing just behind her, grinning from ear to ear. She spun around. Nothing. She was alone. The mirror, though, was another story. The painted face of the painted stranger. That grin lingered there for a heartbeat before vanishing into the glass. Elisa's stomach turned. The Joker's games were no longer confined to the carnival, no longer confined to the shadows of Gotham's streets. The carnival, the disappearances, the laughter, they had all been a prelude. The Joker had never been interested in just terrorizing Gotham. No, he was after something far more sinister now. He was playing with her. Her phone buzzed again, jolting her out of her reverie. She grabbed it, almost desperate for any kind of answer. But it was another message from the same unknown number. "Are you ready to play, detective? You've already made me laugh. Now it's time for the punchline. Meet me where it all began." Elisa's breath caught in her throat. The carnival. The place where it had all started. She had to go. She had no choice. It wasn't just about solving the case anymore. This was about survival. About putting an end to Joker's twisted game before it consumed everything. Before it consumed her. The drive to the carnival lot felt like an eternity. The streets of Gotham had taken on an eerie, almost surreal quality. The laughter that had haunted her mind all week was absent now, replaced by a thick, heavy silence that seemed to press down on her. Her mind kept flashing back to the painted stranger, that unsettling figure in the mirror, but she pushed the thoughts away. She couldn't afford to lose focus. She had to stay sharp. By the time she arrived, the carnival was even worse than before. It wasn't just the rusting rides or the dilapidated tents. It was the feeling in the air. The ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse with energy, like the whole place was alive, waiting. The sign, Ha Ha Land, flickered erratically, casting distorted shadows that twisted unnaturally across the ground. Elisa approached the entrance, her gun drawn, her heart hammering in her chest. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, as if the very air was thick with the weight of the Joker's presence. And then she heard it, the laughter, but it wasn't coming from the rides or the tents. It was coming from inside her head again. Her knees almost gave out beneath her as the laughter grew louder, more oppressive, until it was all she could hear, all she could feel. She pressed her hand to her ears, trying to block it out, but it only grew more intense. And then, through the cacophony of voice, his voice cut through. Detective Graves. It was so close, so real that Elisa spun around, expecting to see him standing there just behind her, grinning with that insane, stretching smile. But there was nothing. Only the empty carnival. She took a step forward, her senses on high alert, her body primed for danger. Then, she heard something else. A soft, almost melodic sound, like a child's music box winding down. It was coming from the funhouse. Without thinking, Elisa moved toward the sound, her gun held tightly in her hand, her steps cautious but determined. The entrance to the funhouse loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. She stepped inside, and immediately the temperature dropped. A thick fog rolled across the floor, swirling around her ankles, as the dim flickering lights cast long skeletal shadows against the warped walls. The mirrors inside were distorted, curved in ways that made it impossible to trust what she was seeing. The laughter was louder now, echoing through the hallways, surrounding her. "You're getting closer, Detective." The Joker's voice sang from the walls, like it was coming from all around her at once. But the joke's not over yet. Not by a long shot. Her pulse raced. She had to move. She couldn't let him break her. She couldn't let him win. But the mirrors were playing tricks. The reflections twisted and bent, showing her images of herself, distorted, broken, laughing. Her own face warped into something unrecognizable. She stopped in her tracks. Her hand trembled as she reached for her radio. But as she did, the laughter stopped. Everything was silent. And then out of the stillness came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing in the dark. "Elisa," the voice called again. "You should have known better than to play with me." Sound of footsteps grew closer, and through the fog, she saw him, the painted stranger. He stepped out of the shadows, his grin impossibly wide, his eyes gleaming with madness. He was real now, not just a shadow in the mirror, but standing before her, his twisted, painted face inches away from hers. "You see, Detective," he whispered, his breath cold against her skin. "The joke's on you." Elisa raised her gun. "No more games," she said, her voice low and steady. But the painted stranger only laughed, that horrible, distorted sound filling the room once again. Elisa's pulse thundered in her ears as the painted stranger's laugh echoed around the dark, fog-filled funhouse. The sound was deafening, suffocating. She gritted her teeth, her grip tightening around the gun as she aimed it directly at him. But the more she focused, the more he seemed to distort. His form blurred, twisted, like he was made of smoke, evaporating and reforming with each blink. "You're not real," she whispered to herself, though even she could hear the doubt in her own voice. But it didn't matter. He was here, and this nightmare wasn't ending until she made it. The painted stranger's grin grew impossibly wider, stretching across his face like it could tear his skin apart. Not real? Oh, Elisa, I'm as real as your fear, as real as the joke you can't escape. Her breath caught in her throat. She could feel the walls closing in, the mirrors reflecting every twist and turn of her panic. Everything in the funhouse was wrong, warped, disjointed. Nothing followed the rules. She couldn't trust what she saw, what she felt, or even what she knew was true. You should have stayed out of this, detective, the painted stranger taunted, his voice low, syrupy sweet. You never were meant to understand the punchline. With a flick of his wrist, the funhouse seemed to shift. The lights flickered, casting sharp shadows across the floor, and suddenly the mirrors, those damned mirrors, reflected more than just her image. They reflected everyone. Figures dressed in tattered carnival costumes stood behind the glass, their eyes locked on her. Their faces were pale, cracked, twisted in permanent, agonizing smiles. Some were grinning, others sobbing. Their tears mixed with paint, their mouths stretched and torn as if they had been caught mid-laugh and left to rot. It was the same terrifying reflection of her, the same unnatural smile that had taunted her from every angle since this twisted carnival had opened. "What's wrong, detective?" The painted stranger's voice cut through the madness. "Are you scared?" Elisa didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. Not now. Not with the laughter becoming an almost physical presence, crawling through her chest, pressing against her lungs. "You're playing a game that you can't win," she muttered, trying to steady her breath. "I'm not scared of you." "Oh, but you are," the painted stranger crooned, stepping closer, his lanky form swaying unnervingly as if he were floating rather than walking. "Deep down, I know the truth. I am your fear, detective. I am your worst nightmare." He moved. A blur, impossibly fast, and suddenly he was standing inches away from her. She didn't pull the trigger. He smiled wider. "Tell me, Elisa, have you ever wondered how far you can push yourself before you break?" The question lingered in the air like a toxin seeping into her skin. Her hand trembled as she gripped the gun tighter, the steel cold and heavy. Her body, however, felt lighter, like it was being pulled by invisible strings. "Enough!" Elisa spat, stepping backward and raising her weapon. "Enough of your games!" But the painted stranger was already gone. The mirrors warped again, and a flash of light blinded her. When her vision cleared, she was no longer standing in the funhouse. She was somewhere else, somewhere familiar yet far worse than any nightmare she'd faced. It was Gotham, but not the Gotham she knew. This Gotham was twisted, dark, and cracked at the seams. The buildings were sagging under their own weight, the streets flooded with stagnant water, and the sky was an unsettling shade of crimson. The air tasted metallic, like blood, and the laughter that filled the air wasn't just a sound. It was a living thing, vibrating in the air around her. Elisa's stomach churned as she looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. But before she could take another step, a figure appeared, standing at the far end of the street, holding something in his hands. It was a man, his face obscured by the shadows. But even from a distance, she could see that something about him was wrong. He was tall, too tall, his limbs unnaturally long. His mouth was wide, stretching across his face with a grotesque, twisted smile that couldn't have been human. As he stepped forward, Elisa felt her body freeze. The man's face, it wasn't just painted. The smile wasn't just a mask. It was carved. The skin around his lips was stretched and torn, the flesh marred by jagged scars that twisted and bubbled like fresh wounds. The smile was a scar, a permanent feature, as if someone had skinned him alive, sewn his mouth into a wide grin, and left him to rot. The laughter grew louder, shaking the very foundation of the crumbling city. "Is this it?" Elisa managed, her voice hoarse. "Is this what you wanted?" The figure tilted his head, the unsettling grin never leaving his face. "What I want, detective, what I need is for you to understand. You're not just dealing with the Joker anymore. No, you're dealing with the laughter itself." His voice was low and teasing, as if this was a game, as if they were both bound by the same rules, rules she didn't understand. "You see, detective," the painted stranger continued, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. "The joke is never about the punchline. It's about who's laughing at the end." "You're just a puppet," Elisa shot back, trying to sound confident, though her voice faltered. "You're not in control. You're just playing a part." The painted stranger laughed, the sound sickening, spiraling. "Am I? Or maybe I'm the one who's been pulling the strings all along." He stepped forward again, closer now, the reflection of his grin widening with every inch. No, she couldn't let him break her. Not now. Not when she was so close. "Do you think you can stop it?" "Stop me?" he taunted, his laughter piercing the air. Elisa raised her gun again, this time with more certainty. The painted stranger didn't flinch, his body still standing there in that unnaturally twisted way. She could almost feel the air charge, the anticipation thick between them. "You can't," he whispered, as the world around them seemed to bend. With one final breath, Elisa pulled the trigger. Elisa's finger was still pressed to the trigger, the cold steel of the gun trembling in her grip. The painted stranger's figure remained unchanged, his grotesque grin stretched across his face like a stitched-up wound, a symbol of all the horrors he'd unleashed. "It's not real," Elisa told herself, though the words felt hollow in her mind. "This can't be real." But the air around her was heavy. The laughter hadn't stopped. In fact, it was louder now, vibrating through her chest, shaking her bones. It wasn't the Joker's laugh. No, this was something more primal, something ancient. It was the laughter of the world itself, mocking her, pushing her toward the edge. And just like that, the painted stranger moved. One moment he was a figure at the end of a crumbling street, and the next he was right in front of her, his distorted grin just inches from her face. "You missed," he said with a low chuckle, his voice a breathy rasp that slid under her skin. Elisa recoiled, but the painted stranger's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with inhuman strength. His grip was cold, like ice, like death itself. He twisted her arm until the gun fell from her hand, clattering to the ground. His laughter filled the air, thick and suffocating. "You really thought you could end it like that?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with an almost affectionate malice. "Oh, detective, you're not nearly as clever as you think." She jerked her arm free, but it was useless. Her legs felt like lead, her mind clouded with a mixture of fear and rage. She wanted to fight, wanted to end this, but something in the way the painted stranger looked at her, like she was a mouse trapped in a maze, told her that this wasn't going to be so simple. "You're in my world now," the painted stranger whispered, his smile never faltering. "And in my world, detective, there are rules. There's a game, and the punchline comes when you least expect it." For the first time since she'd entered the carnival, Elisa felt the full weight of the Joker's madness bearing down on her. This wasn't just some twisted amusement park. This was the joke itself. It was a ritual, a dark, unholy game of survival and torment. The painted stranger stepped back, his movement almost fluid, his lanky form sliding through the air like a wisp of smoke. "You're a smart woman, Elisa," he said, "but you're missing the point. You can fight all you want, but that just makes it funnier." "Shut up," Elisa growled, trying to shake the fog in her head. The walls of the carnival seemed to close in. On her, the broken structures of the rides and the faded, crumbling tents swallowing her whole. "What the hell do you want from me?" "What I want," the painted stranger repeated, his voice teasing, almost playful. "What I need is for you to understand something. This is the punchline. The joke's never about the killing, the chaos, or even the laughs. The real joke is that you are the punchline, Elisa. You always have been." She didn't understand. The words didn't make sense. Her chest was tight, her vision blurring. The laughter, it was everywhere now, crawling up her spine, eating away at her thoughts. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice breaking with the pressure. "This is insane. I've seen enough of Joker's games to know what's going on. This is just another trap. But before she could finish, the painted stranger raised a hand, stopping her cold. "Oh, detective, you're not listening. This isn't about escaping. This isn't about the law, or even about you beating me." He paused, a dark glint in his eyes. "This is about how much you'll bend before you break, how far you'll go to survive. Because once you realize what the Joker's really doing, there's no escape. You will laugh with me, or die trying." He took a step back, raising both arms like he was about to welcome her into some twisted embrace. "You see, you've already started the ritual. You are the punchline. And it doesn't matter how hard you fight, because the final laugh, it'll be mine." The ground beneath Elisa's feet seemed to tremble. The entire carnival warped, flickering like a broken film reel. Her stomach churned. She had to stop this. She had to end this. But the painted stranger was right. She was trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Joker's influence was everywhere, crawling into her skin, filling her lungs with laughter. "You think you have control?" the painted stranger continued, his voice dropping into a whisper, like a secret just for her. "You think you're still the detective, still the smart one? You're just the joke, Elisa. You were always meant to be. This is your fate. This is your laugh track." He snapped his fingers and the ground shook again. The world around her flickered like a light bulb about to go out. And then, suddenly, she was no longer in the carnival. She was back in her apartment, her small, dimly lit living room, staring at the same cracked mirror where this nightmare had begun. But this time, it was different. The mirror wasn't cracked anymore. Instead, it was a perfect reflection. Perfect except for the image staring back at her. It was her, but not her. It was a reflection of a woman who was broken, her face warped in a wide, painted grin. Blood trickled down her cheeks where her smile had been carved open. Her eyes gleamed with a maniacal gleam, empty yet filled with glee. Elisa stumbled back, gasping for air, her heart racing. "This is you, detective," the painted stranger's voice whispered from behind her. "This is what you'll become, the punchline, the joke." And then, from the reflection in the mirror, her reflection smiled. The laugh that followed was hers. A twisted, guttural laugh that echoed off the walls and into the corners of her mind. "Welcome to the joke, Elisa," the painted stranger said softly, his voice just a whisper in her ear. "It's your turn to laugh." And with that, the world went dark. Elisa's heart pounded as the world around her spun into darkness. She tried to move, but it was as if the air itself was thick with something invisible, pulling her down into the void. The laughter that had haunted her since she'd set foot in this damned carnival was now deafening, echoing from every corner of her mind. "It's not real. It's not real." But the words offered no comfort. In the blackness, she could feel the pressure building, like the walls were closing in on her. The laughter was no longer distant. It was inside her, like a part of her own soul had been ripped out and replaced with the Joker's madness. She struggled to breathe, gasping for air as the darkness seemed to constrict around her chest. Her legs gave way, and she sank to the ground, the weight of despair threatening to crush her. "You can't escape," the painted stranger's voice whispered, cold and familiar. It slithered into her ear like a toxin, making her skin crawl. "You never could. Not from the joke. Not from me." Elisa squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the sound, the feeling, but it was impossible. The laughter was a constant, gnawing presence, just beyond the edge of her thoughts. "You're already laughing, Elisa," the voice continued, now directly in her mind. "You just don't know it yet." She opened her eyes. The darkness was gone, but nothing had really changed. She was still in the carnival, still in the funhouse, still trapped in this twisted nightmare. But now, she was no longer alone. Standing in front of her was a figure familiar and yet utterly terrifying. The painted stranger had changed again. His grin was wider, his skin paler, and his eyes gleamed with a sickening glee. But there was something else about him now, a sense of finality, as if the end of the game was near. Elisa tried to stand, but her legs shook beneath her. She was still trapped in the funhouse, the mirrors all around her reflecting not just her image, but 1,000 versions of herself, each one twisted and laughing. "You don't get it, detective," the painted stranger said, his voice almost soothing now, as if he were speaking to a child. "You're the punchline, you always were." The words sent a cold shiver down her spine. She wanted to shout, to fight, but her voice was lost in the laughter. The mirrors, the walls, the floor, they all seemed to pulse with it, vibrating as if the very fabric of reality was coming undone. The painted stranger stepped forward, his face inches from hers, the stench of decay on his breath. "Elisa, Elisa, Elisa," he whispered, almost lovingly. "You really think you're the hero in this story? That you're going to save Gotham, save yourself?" He shook his head slowly, his smile never wavering. "No, the joke's always been on you." Her mind reeled. "Save herself? You're nothing. More than a clown in a broken world, detective." His voice became darker, colder. "And just like the others, you'll laugh until you die. 'Cause in the end, everyone laughs, everyone breaks, even you." Elisa's chest tightened, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The laughter was suffocating her now, drowning out her thoughts. She couldn't think straight anymore. She couldn't see straight. Every mirror around her showed a version of herself, each one more twisted, more manic than the last. Her reflection was laughing, but it wasn't her laugh. It was the laugh of the Joker. Of them. "No," Elisa whispered, her voice trembling, a thin thread of resistance. "No, this isn't me. I'm not one of them. I'm a cop. I'm fighting this." The painted stranger's grin grew wider. "You think that makes you special? You think that makes you different? You're just a puppet, Elisa, just like everyone else. Everyone thinks they're the exception until they realize the truth." He reached out, his hand ghostly cold, and touched her cheek. His fingers left a burning trail in their wake. Elisa flinched, but she couldn't move. The weight of his gaze was too much, too suffocating. "You're part of this," he whispered, as if confessing a secret. "You always have been. All you had to do was embrace it. Embrace the laugh. Let it take you." Elisa's breath hitched. His words were seeping into her, twisting their way into her mind. Let it take you. It was a dangerous suggestion. A suggestion that felt more real than anything she had ever heard. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she couldn't. In the reflection of the nearest mirror, Elisa saw herself. her face wide in an unnatural grin, her eyes glinting with something dark. The image began to move, mimicking her every gesture, but with a sickening twist. It didn't look scared. It looked free. No. No. This isn't me. But the painted stranger wasn't done. He stepped back, his smile widening further. "What's the joke, detective? What's the punchline? You think you're different because you're fighting back, because you're still clinging to the idea that there's a way out. But you're wrong. There's no escape. The punchline's already been delivered." Before she could react, the world around her shifted once again. The mirrors shattered, the floor crumbled beneath her feet, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Time stood still. The laughter went silent, and then suddenly there was only one thing she could hear: the faint tick-tick-tick of a clock. It was a soft sound, like the ticking of an old, forgotten watch, and it was growing louder, faster. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that sound. It was a countdown. "Elisa," the painted stranger whispered, his voice barely audible now. "It's time. You're the joke. And when you finally understand, when you finally laugh, then it'll all be over." The ticking became deafening. The air grew heavier, suffocating her, pulling her down into the darkness. Elisa squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it all out, but it was too late. The moment she opened her eyes again, the painted stranger was gone. The mirrors were gone, the carnival was gone, and all that was left was silence. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a silence that was pregnant with something waiting. The laughter was gone, but Elisa knew it was only a matter of time before it came back. And when it did, it would be her turn to laugh. The silence was oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Elisa stood motionless in the ruins, the carnival, her mind racing, her heart pounding in her chest. The painted stranger, the Joker, was gone, but his presence lingered like a phantom. The air still vibrated with the remnants of laughter, as though the very world itself had been infected by madness. She took a step forward, her legs shaky, unsure of her footing. Everything felt wrong. The world around her felt off-kilter, like she was walking through a dream, or worse, a nightmare. Every broken ride, every shattered mirror, every flickering light seemed to mock her. The echoes of the carnival's twisted energy were still inside her head, a constant reminder of the terror she had just endured. "This isn't real," Elisa muttered under her breath, trying to steady herself. But even her voice sounded hollow, as though the words had no weight. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to regain control of her racing thoughts. It had been days, weeks maybe, since she'd entered this nightmare. The boundaries between reality and the twisted world of the carnival had blurred long ago. She didn't even know if she was still in Gotham anymore. Opening her eyes, she scanned the area. The carnival was still there, broken and decaying. But now it seemed to pulse with a strange energy. It was like the entire place was alive, feeding on her fear, feeding on the chaos that the Joker had created. And then she heard it. A faint click, click, click. The sound of something moving in the shadows. Elisa's heart skipped a beat as her instincts flared. She wasn't alone. She wasn't free. From the darkness emerged a figure. A man in a tattered purple suit, his face painted white, his lips a grotesque crimson grin. It was him, the Joker, but not the Joker she knew. This was something different, something other. His eyes were wide, manic, filled with a gleaming, sick joy that made her stomach churn. He wasn't the laughing, chaotic criminal she had chased through Gotham for years. No, this was the Joker in his truest form, the embodiment of madness itself. Elisa took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. She had always known that the Joker was dangerous, unpredictable, a force of nature. But this was something else. This wasn't just a man. This was a manifestation of the chaos that had consumed everything. Well, well, well. The Joker's voice was soft, almost affectionate, as though they were old friends sharing a private joke. Look who finally woke up. His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too jagged. Thought you could escape? Thought you could run? From me? Oh, detective. You're in my world now. Elisa's pulse quickened. What? What are you talking about? She tried to keep her voice steady, but it came out shaky. I don't belong here. I'm getting out. The Joker chuckled darkly, the sound dripping with malice. He stepped closer, his movements smooth, deliberate. You don't get it, do you, detective? There is no out. There never was. You're part of the joke. His words hit her like a slap to the face. She recoiled, stumbling back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She'd fought so hard to resist, to hold on to her sanity. But now it felt like everything she'd known, everything she'd believed in was slipping through her fingers. You're wrong, Elisa said, her voice gaining strength. I'm not one of your toys. I won't laugh. The Joker's grin never faltered. In fact, it seemed to stretch even wider, impossibly so. Oh, but you will, he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. You're already laughing, Elisa. You just don't know it yet. He reached out and placed a cold hand on her shoulder, sending a jolt of ice through her spine. She flinched, but she couldn't escape. There was nowhere to go. The carnival had become a prison, and the Joker was its warden. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The world around them flickered, the carnival shifting, warping as if it were alive, pulsating with energy. The laughter, once distant, now roared in her ears, deafening and uncontrollable. It was everywhere, inside her, outside her, crawling under her skin. You've been laughing all along, detective. But the Joker wasn't done. His voice a sickening lullaby. He stepped back, giving her a theatrical bow. Every time you thought you were in control, they were part of some twisted performance. Every time you thought you could stop me. That was the grand finale. The fact that you never understood that you were always a part of the punchline. The final act. Clenched her fists, trying to push away the despair that threatened to consume her. Beneath Elisa's feet shook violently. She couldn't let him win. She stumbled. She couldn't. Her vision spinning as the carnival around her began to collapse. The Ferris wheel tilted and groaned, the carriages dangling dangerously. The cotton candy stands crumbled to the ground. The entire place was coming apart, as if it were nothing more than a mirage. But the Joker stood there unaffected, his laugh ringing out in the chaos. And then, it all went quiet. The ground stopped shaking. The carnival was gone. In its place stood an empty void, a never-ending abyss. Elisa felt herself falling, but there was no ground to catch her, no walls to break her fall. For a moment she was weightless, lost in the emptiness, her mind spinning. The Joker's voice echoed in the distance, taunting her. You're nothing, more than a joke, Elisa. Nothing but a laugh, the punchline. And then, before she could process anything else, a light appeared before her, blinding and intense. She reached toward it instinctively, her heart racing as the darkness closed in. But the light wasn't salvation. It was the final curtain call. Elisa's fingers gripped the edge of something solid, her nails digging into the rough surface. She blinked against the blinding light that surrounded her, her mind still reeling from the collapse of the carnival. The Joker's voice still echoed in her head, each word wrapping around her thoughts like a snake, suffocating her. Nothing but a laugh. The punchline. It was everywhere, there was no escaping it. She squinted, her eyes adjusting to the light. Slowly the brightness faded, and she saw the ground beneath her feet, concrete, solid. Gotham. She was back in the city. Or was she? The skyline loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding, as if the whole city had been swallowed by the night. Elisa took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her body in space once again. The vertigo that had plagued her for what felt like an eternity began to subside. But the feeling of dread remained. Her fingers still gripped the rough concrete beneath her, the reality of it grounding her for the first time in what felt like forever. She slowly stood, dusting herself off, her muscles stiff from the endless twisting, falling, and spiraling through the Joker's world. But then, the laughter. The sound slithered into her mind once more, creeping into the cracks in her consciousness until it grew into a deafening roar. She clutched her temples, stumbling back, trying to block it out, but it was impossible. It was the laughter of 1,000 broken souls. The Joker's laughter, amplified, wrapped around her like chains. Not again, Elisa whispered hoarsely. She hadn't escaped. She wasn't free. The Joker's grip was on her, always. The shadows stretched, warping and shifting as the distorted figure of the painted stranger, no longer even attempting to hide behind the mask of the carnival, emerged from the darkness. The Joker was here, but somehow different. His grin was still wide, yet it seemed almost delightful in its cruelty. "You really thought you could escape?" The painted stranger's voice was syrupy sweet, like a cruel mockery of affection. How adorable. "You're still thinking you're the hero of this story." His voice turned darker, more twisted. "But you're not, Elisa. You never were." Elisa stood tall, fighting back the tremors in her body. She had faced this before. She had stared down the Joker and lived. She could do this again. "You're wrong," she spat, her voice stronger this time, though every word was a struggle against the weight of the madness he had injected into her veins. "I'm not the punchline. You can't control me." The Joker laughed, his high-pitched cackle filling the air like nails on a chalkboard. He swirled around her, his movements fluid and mocking. "Oh, Elisa, you are the joke. You always have been. You just didn't get it yet, did you?" The ground trembled beneath their feet. Elisa didn't know if it was real, or just another manifestation of the chaos she had fallen into. But she could feel the city itself shaking, like it too was dying, caught in the Joker's madness. The laughter grew louder, impossible to escape. Every corner of her mind was being infected. Was it him? Was it her? Or was it Gotham itself laughing at her? "You've spent your whole life trying to make sense of this place," the Joker said, his voice a low, mocking whisper. "Trying to impose order on chaos. But there is no order here, Elisa. There is no logic, only laughter." Elisa's chest tightened. He was right. She had always tried to be the one who could make things right, who could understand Gotham, hold it together when it was on the verge of tearing apart. But what if she was wrong? What if Gotham didn't need saving? What if it was already lost? The Joker tilted his head, eyes gleaming with amusement. "Do you feel it yet, Elisa? The joke has already been told, and you're the punchline." A sharp crack of thunder rang through the air. A flash of white lightning split the night sky, casting a shadow across the city. Elisa turned her head instinctively, and that's when she saw it. The carnival, not just any carnival, the carnival, it had returned. It was no longer the dilapidated, broken mockery of amusement it had been. Now it stood tall and intact, bathed in an eerie, beckoning her in. "No," Elisa whispered, dread coursing through her. "No, no, no." She backed away, her heart hammering in her chest. The Joker had pulled her back. He had dragged her into this world once more, into the depths of his mind. And in his mind, there was no escape. She could feel it now. The carnival had never gone anywhere. It had simply been waiting, watching for her to break. "Run, detective," the painted stranger murmured, his smile widening. "Run, but you can never escape it. You're already part of the joke. Everyone is. Everyone laughs." Elisa's stomach churned. Her thoughts were fractured, slipping through her fingers like sand. The carnival was calling to her, like a siren song, pulling her toward it. The lights, the colors, the sounds, it was all too familiar. The laughter rang in her ears again, louder than before, now mingling with the cries of the people she had failed to protect. Her failure, her guilt, twisted in the shadows, waiting for her to embrace it. The Joker's voice cut through her thoughts once more. "Do you want to know what the punchline is, detective? It's you. You always were." The ground rumbled beneath her feet. She felt herself being pulled inexorably toward the heart of the carnival, a twisted force she couldn't fight. And she knew in that moment that this was it. This was her final act. The last laugh was hers, or would be. Whether she would scream or laugh, she would fall into it. The darkness of Gotham, the insanity of the Joker's world, would swallow her whole. With each step she took, it became harder to resist. The carnival's lights flickered, the sounds of distorted music and warped laughter growing louder. And then, just as Elisa thought she could not bear it anymore, a voice whispered from the shadows, "You're not alone." It was her voice, her own whisper in the chaos. "You're not alone." The carnival stopped. The laughter fell silent. Everything froze. Elisa turned, the sudden stillness settling over her like a heavy cloak. The painted stranger, the Joker, was gone. The carnival, the city, everything disappeared into nothing. Elisa stood alone, her breath shallow, her heart beating in time with the world that had once been her nightmare. And for the first time in days, she didn't hear the laughter. But somewhere, deep in her mind, she knew it wasn't over. Elisa's breath came in ragged bursts, her chest heaving as she stood alone in the void. The carnival, the Joker, the twisted madness, all of it had faded into silence, leaving her suspended in a space between worlds. The shadows stretched, warped, and then collapsed into a stillness that pressed down on her, almost suffocating. For the first time in days, weeks maybe, she was free of the chaos. The laughter, the mirrors, the spiraling madness had all faded. For a fleeting moment, Elisa believed she had won, but she knew better than to trust such fleeting moments. In Gotham, nothing was ever truly free. And in the Joker's world, freedom was a lie. The world around her flickered, as though it were on the verge of disintegrating. The ground beneath her feet cracked, and a cold wind whispered through the darkness. Elisa's heart raced again. She wasn't alone. She could feel him, the painted stranger lurking just beyond the edge of her vision. Watching, waiting. "You thought you could escape?" The Joker's voice slithered into her mind, soft at first, like a whisper on the wind. "Foolish detective. You're still in my world. And in my world there is no escaping." Elisa's legs trembled beneath her, but she forced herself to stand tall. Her eyes darted to the horizon, and there in the distance a shadow began to form. A shape she knew all too well. The carnival, the lights, the twisted rides. It was all coming back, just as it had before. Only now it seemed darker, more real. It was pulling her in, dragging her back into its heart. "Don't you see?" The Joker's voice echoed again, louder this time, mocking. "You are the joke, Elisa. You always have been." "No," Elisa whispered through gritted teeth. "I'm not. I refuse to be." But even as she spoke, the ground beneath her feet shifted again. The carnival was closer now, the sound of carnival music distorting in her ears. The laughter, familiar and unsettling, crept into the edges of her mind. The Joker was getting closer. His presence was overwhelming, suffocating. Are you ready for the final act? The painted stranger appeared before her. His face stretched into a grotesque grin, his eyes wide with the manic joy that had haunted her throughout this twisted journey. He was dressed in his tattered purple suit, his movements erratic, as though he couldn't contain the chaos swirling within him. Elisa's heart pounded. She was standing at the edge of the abyss, the Joker's world closing in on her once again. The darkness that had once seemed so distant was now tangible, the pressure of it crushing her. Every breath felt like an effort, every movement forced. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, grounding herself. I'm done with you, Joker. The painted stranger tilted his head, as if considering her words. Done with me? Oh, darling, we're never done. He took a step closer, the air around him crackling with the energy of madness. You've been dancing on the edge of the joke from the start, Elisa. You're not the hero. You're not the victim. You're the punchline. The laughter grew louder, more insistent, until it drowned out everything else. Elisa squeezed her eyes shut, fighting to block it out. She had heard it all before. It's not real. It's not real. She whispered it to herself, over and over, as though the words could shield her from the insanity that pressed in on all sides. But when she opened her eyes again, the carnival had arrived. It was no longer a distant shadow in her mind. It was, right in front of her, towering, impossible. The Ferris wheel spun with maddening speed. The laughter came from all directions. The clown-faced mirrors mocked her at every turn, reflecting 100 different versions of herself, each more twisted than the last. No, Elisa shouted, her voice trembling but fierce. I won't be a part of this. The Joker laughed. It wasn't the manic, high-pitched laugh she had grown used to hearing. This laugh was deep, almost satisfied. Of course you will, detective. You always have been. You've been part of the joke from the moment you stepped into this carnival. From the moment you entered my world, you became part of the act. Elisa's body trembled with the weight of his words. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself to stand. She had come too far to fall now. She had faced the depths of madness, confronted the Joker's twisted games, and somehow, she was still standing. I won't laugh, she said, her voice steady despite the storm of fear and doubt raging inside her. I'm not part of your joke. I'm fighting back. The Joker's smile widened, his eyes flashing with the same mad glee. He clapped his hands as though delighted by her defiance. Oh, Elisa, you are fighting. But fighting me isn't the joke. The joke is that you think you can win. The punchline? It's you. And no matter how hard you fight, no matter how hard you scream, you will laugh. The carnival lights flickered violently, casting twisted shadows that seemed to claw at her. The laughter intensified, vibrating through the air, burrowing into her bones. It was overwhelming, suffocating. Elisa clutched her head, struggling to hold on to herself, but the world around her began to blur, the edges dissolving into the madness of the Joker's realm. No, she cried out, but the words were swallowed by the laughter. I will not laugh. But then, as the world spun, out of control, something changed. A voice, soft and steady, broke through the cacophony of madness. Her voice. You are not alone, it whispered again, the words like a lifeline. Elisa's eyes snapped open, and for the first time since she had entered the carnival's twisted world, she felt a spark of something that had always been there, buried beneath the fear, the doubt, the madness. She was not alone, not anymore. The laughter roared around her, but it no longer consumed her. She didn't have to laugh. She didn't have to fall. With every ounce of strength left in her, Elisa took one step forward, then another. The carnival shuddered, as though it couldn't comprehend her defiance. The Joker's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "You—" he began, his voice cracking, but Elisa was done. She didn't wait for him to finish. With a single defiant step, she reached the heart of the carnival, its darkest, most twisted ride. She stood there, staring into the abyss of the Joker's world, and then, without hesitation, she jumped. The carnival exploded around her, a burst of blinding light, and then everything went silent. Elisa fights back against the Joker's twisted world, refusing to be a part of his game any longer. As she faces her darkest fears and confronts the Joker in the heart of his madness, she finds the strength to reject the punchline and free herself from his grip. But even as she takes the final step, there's a sense that the Joker's influence will never fully leave Gotham, or her.